Web Summit Vancouver, how's it going? Yeah! Who's excited to talk about money and why traditional banks suck? Yeah, right. Okay, so fintech has been through a lot lately. It ballooned during the pandemic, then it went through a painful correction, and now, that's exactly what we're going to talk about, right? And who better to kind of explain not so much where fintech has been, but where it's going. Remember, I have Mercury's CEO here. Immad, why don't you tell us in one line, what is Mercury?
Sure. Mercury provides banking, credit cards, and other financial services to mostly businesses, startups, e-commerce, professional service companies in the US.
Perfect. Now let's zero in on what exactly Mercury does and how it plays in the larger fintech space. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about, so we went through, like I said, ups and downs, it's a roller coaster, and fintech now is actually, like the whole space is more above water than the rest of tech. And is Mercury profitable right now?
Yeah, we've been profitable for 12 quarters
Yeah,
now.
exactly. So you're profitable for a bunch of quarters. And yet, in March, you raised $300 million at a $3.5 billion valuation, right?
Yep.
So are things getting frothy again?
In fintech, I don't think they're getting frothy. Most of the early stage interest is very much in AI. When we talk about like fintech renaissance, in 2021, fintech was the bubbliest of the bubble.
Definitely.
About 20% of all VC funding went to fintech. Last year, it was down to, I just had ChatGPT look this up, so hopefully it's correct. It was down to 7.6%. And if you think about it, that's 7.6% of a much smaller pie. So from a fintech industry perspective, this is a pretty deep recession. And what we're seeing now is there was a bunch of companies that were started around that time, or we were started in 2017, that are reaching maturity, right? So there's, the well-known ones are like Revolut, us, Chime, Stripe. There's a ton of companies. Actually, looked it up last year. From the 9 companies that were considering IPO or being close to IPO, 5 of them were fintech companies. So this is a huge category. And it was, for a while, everyone was like, oh, we kind of overdid it. There's not going to be any success here. But I think it's inevitable that we're part of this transition where banks still dominate most of the revenue in financial services. In the US, that's $2 trillion a year. And it's just obvious to me that they don't know how to build products. And most of human interaction with financial services is going to be using a mobile app, maybe a chatbot or a website. And fintech is going to be kind of the companies that enable those kind of experiences.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that VCs, we're chasing the money, right? And fintech is money, so it wasn't exactly a stretch. But now they're chasing AI, and so that kind of lets you focus and build without all the frothiness, or at least you're telling me that there's less frothiness despite your recent cash injection. I'm curious though, what trends aside from AI are you paying attention to, and do you think fintech in general should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I mean, the underlying trend, which why I started the company, is if you look at the top financial services companies, it's still the old school companies. Visa and JPMC both have more than 700 billion in valuation. So it's very much companies that have been around for 40, 50, 200 years sometimes. And while every other sector has had this massive disruption, right? Even something as simple as like cars has been disrupted by Tesla. The same thing hasn't happened with banking. And the biggest issue was, especially in the US, it was just very hard to innovate. And actually in Europe, there was a ton of innovations, even pre-2017. So if you think about most of these fintech companies that have done well in Europe, they were started 2013, 14. And that's because there was a really nice kind of fintech banking charter in the UK, in Germany, and a few other kind of EU countries. And that just hasn't happened in the US at all. In the US, there was an ecosystem around bank sponsorship. So Mercury itself is not a bank. We work with 3 partner banks. And that ecosystem was still pretty new when I started Mercury in 2017. It kind of matured into 2021, and that was a real enabler of the fintech innovation. It's very hard to do anything with money without having a bank that is willing to work with you. And that's the big trend. And yeah, for a while, I guess it wasn't cool, but the companies that were building kept on building, and we actually grew every single year, since we've launched, and we've been profitable for the last 2.5 years. So that's the big trend. Obviously, when it comes to kind of consumer apps, you have a lot of things were explored during 2021, and many things didn't work out. So the big loser, I would say, was fintech lending. There was a ton of money that went into fintech lending, and there's been almost no winners in that space. I guess BNPL maybe is the one exception with Affirm and a few others. I think the whole neobank space or the digital banking space that we're in, it's still pretty new and there's not that many players in it. I think there will, hopefully us, Revolut, Monzo are doing it in Europe, and there'll be a lot of winners, I think, in that space, because that is like, being a depository institution and collecting consumers and businesses that you provide these services to is kind of the core of what people think of when they think bank.
How would you define neobank, though? Because I feel like you said there aren't that many players, but I feel like there's tons. So what makes it something a neobank? And I feel like even some of what I would still classify as a bank, but don't have a physical branch, are very much seen as neobanks in some ways. So how would you define that?
I mean, at least I look at the US business banking, which is obviously the space we're in.
Yep.
There's maybe 5 or so players in that space, but this is a huge space. This is 40% of all banking revenue in the US, so 40% of a $2 trillion industry. Like, if you think about SaaS as a whole, like B2B SaaS, I think that's something like a $2 trillion industry as a whole. And there's like hundreds of players in B2B SaaS. So comparison-wise, this is a very uncompetitive space. I find it very surprising, because I look at it, I'm like, these are huge markets that clearly there's going to be a ton of more innovation in. There is a little bit more, let's say, in payments, or as I said, there used to be more in lending, and that's kind of died out. But yeah, neobanking still seems like a very open space. I mean, consumer-wise, we've got Chime, and there was a bunch of players like Chime, but those are actually targeting a very specific part of US consumer banking. It's very much focused on the underbanked, which is actually not the biggest revenue category at all. It's obviously was underbanked, so there was a entry space for digital banking, and it was kind of enabled by Durbin and things like that. But yeah, I think this whole space is going to be extremely, I will not be surprised if people make companies this year that will become a $100 billion company in fintech in the next 10 years.
So everyone is obviously talking about AI. In your opinion, what should fintech companies, fintech investors, fintech customers, what should they pay, what matters in AI for fintech?
Yeah. AI is actually fintech is one of these spaces that AI disrupts the least, and I think in general it's a nice tailwind for fintech. One of the tricky things about fintech, well, the two tricky parts about fintech, or the hidden costs in fintech, are customer support and fraud. When you do a service, you don't always expect, you're like, oh, this is a flashy thing I want to do, but then you have to really staff it with like a full customer support team and really worry about the fraud attacks. Both of these things are made much easier to deal with when it comes to AI.
So AI tackling fraud and algorithms
you can
there,
build
and
much
then
better
Gen
AI
AI
tools around fraud, around there's some, obviously people can do deep fakes and attack you in that manner, but there's also AI you can build to analyze patterns and make sure people are who they say they are. And on the customer support side, obviously you can service people. So all of this kind of labor side of fintech is made much easier by AI. I'm sure there will be, and I'm also an investor, and I've invested in a few kind of services that will enable commerce or give you better insights into finances and things like that that are AI enabled. But in general, there's a lot of work to make a fintech company. You can't vibe code your way to a fintech company. So
I'm sure someone's trying.
But yeah, there's the whole regulatory framework. Fintech is hard, right? Before this, I did software companies. Those were at least 3 times easier. You can do a software company in 3 months. Fintech, 9 months plus. It took us a year and a half to launch Mercury. So in that way, there is this kind of regulatory protection around fintech that doesn't, and probably healthcare that doesn't exist for normal software companies, which makes it a little bit more immune from AI. But obviously, you still need to kind of innovate in that space.
Yeah, of course. So Netscape's CEO or former CEO famously said that there's only two ways of making money in business: bundling and unbundling. And I feel like fintech is always, like everything else, it's a perennial cycle. Where are we in that cycle right now?
Yeah, I think there've been all of these companies that reached a level of maturity with their first product over the last, let's say, 7 years. So for Mercury, we were very focused on just the business bank account. We want to be your operational bank account, and that's basically all we did for the first 4 years. Since then, we've launched corporate credit cards, spend management. Last year, we launched bill pay, invoicing, and personal banking. So as we've reached a set of maturity, distribution that works, it makes sense to basically rebundle, right? Like a lot of the work we do is acquiring customers, and now that you're using Mercury as your core banking system, that's where your money is, that's where your users, that's where your finance team is. It makes sense to add these extra features that go beyond banking in the traditional sense, but give you a lot of utility as a user. And we're seeing this across the whole industry, right? There was I think Robinhood is doing a great job around this. They actually launched banking and credit cards, and they're doing all of this stuff and going way beyond just a brokerage app. Revolut is doing a ton of this in Europe and US. So we're very much in the phase that fintechs have reached a certain level of scale. Most of them launched with a single product, single feature. And often, actually, that feature was unbundling something that traditional banks did, right? A lot of it was, take business banking, it was, that's one feature that JPMC has, but we built a deep product there that worked really well for entrepreneurs. And now we're in this rebundling phase, but the things that are being rebundled are not the same things that banks used to do. Like no one went to their bank to build an invoicing system, whereas we have that fully integrated into kind of the software suite we provide people. So it's definitely the rebundling phase, at least for fintechs at scale. Obviously, if you're a small fintech and you're trying to enter the space, you'll probably take one of those wedges. And some of that might be actually attacking the new fintechs that have reached scales, and maybe you're doing with AI or something like that. But for the fintechs at scale, actually Stripe's another good example of this. They have a ton of products now that are growing nicely.
So would you ever consider acquiring a competitor directly, given the cash you've raised, and then bundling in their services?
Sure. I mean, we will. It's always worth considering. It's a little tricky for Mercury because we are. The main differentiation that Mercury has is that we try to build a really powerful, integrated product where the UX is amazing. It's very hard to kind of buy a company and attach that and have the UX and all the flows be seamless. At least so far, we haven't done it, but I'm not close to it.
Okay, that's fair. Could you tell tell the audience, what do you hope that fintech will achieve this year?
What do I hope it would achieve?
I mean, we only have half a year left, let's say, but roughly.
Well, it's kind of funny. Like, one part of me wants everyone to keep ignoring fintech, right? Because then I can keep hiring great people, and we can keep growing and not have much competition. So, I guess another part of me wants to see, these companies that reached a reasonable scale to go public. I think that's really healthy for the whole VC ecosystem, but the fintech ecosystem especially. So, we've seen Chime file, Circle filed. I don't think they've gone public yet, and then obviously Klarna filed and then pulled back, but I think they will go public soon. But there's not been that many fintech companies that are public, right? It's PayPal, obviously. I don't know if Visa and MasterCard count. But there's a few others for sure. Affirm is public, but it'll be good to see these companies that reached quite a lot of maturity and have big scale be in the public market, and that's obviously drives excitement in the whole ecosystem.
So you see the IPO as hitting maturity? Like that's a strong signal for you because of all the regulatory and getting all your accounts and books in order?
I guess I have a bit of an abstract view that I think it's a bit of a shame that there's less public companies and a lot of the growth is
not unique to fintech though, right?
It's not unique to fintech. Yeah. But it seems like a shame to me that we actually, when we did our Series B in 2021, we did a crowdfund with WeFunders, so we made it so 3,000 of our customers bought at the same price as the VCs in our Series B. And I think that's important. I want our customers to have ownership in Mercury, and I think it's healthy for the whole ecosystem and the US for these kind of at-scale companies to be public and have retail investors be part of that success.
Yeah, I mean, Reddit CEO has the same approach, right? That's what he wanted to push. Okay, so that's for this year. You want more companies to hopefully go public, or maybe in the near term. What about in the longer term? So 2035, where do you want fintech to be?
Again, I guess like it's easier for me to answer the question of like where do I want Mercury to be. We have pretty broad ambitions around kind of redefining and reimagining banking so that it's not just the bank account, it's a full suite to help you run your finances. And last year we launched Mercury Personal, so we want to do that across your business and consumer life. There's a lot to build there. We're just at the start, so that's what I'm thinking about from a Mercury perspective. I think one of the spicy takes that I would have is that banks charge too much money to consumers, right? There's a lot of both consumers and businesses, like SMB banking is extremely expensive. There's these crazy fees, and often these fees are somewhat punitive against the poorest businesses and the poorest consumers. I don't like that. I think fintech essentially often approaches these spaces with a model of making it free and cheaper and more transparent. At least that's how Mercury does it. We don't charge for the banking product to SMBs. And the way we can do that is because we're digital, right? If you walk into a bank, there's a bank branch, there's a teller.
They have higher costs,
So I think the good thing that comes for humanity as a whole by 2035 is if a ton of these things are digital and cheaper and better for consumers and businesses.
And you want to tie business and personal. Would you ever expand into trading and crypto and all that?
Yeah, I don't think we will, and we did actually announce Mercury Invest on our personal site, so you can buy S&P mutual funds and US government T-bills. I don't think we'll do like kind of gambling type stuff, but we'll help you responsibly invest money.
Okay, perfect. Well, we have a whole screen here telling us to wrap up, so
yeah.
We'll end it there. Thank you so much, Immad.
Yeah, it's a fun conversation. Thanks, everyone.